Even though, there are some people that are really quite active, actually our pets are very inactive. Most house pets today just don't get a lot of exercise. The interesting thing is if you ask pet parents, is your pet active? They say, yes, of course, because they're remembering the 30 seconds that they had the zoomies around the room or when the cat was, bouncing from the couch to the chair. And that's what they remember. And they're like, yes, my pet is active. But when you look at a whole 24-hour period or you look at the week, actually our pets are very inactive.
Well, welcome to this Pet Food Science podcast. I'm very pleased to have an old friend and coworker together to talk about these things today. This is Dr. Kathy Gross. We're going to talk about weight management. So, Kathy, I wonder if you might introduce yourself a little bit and say how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, it's so great to see you, Dennis, and it's been long. So it's great to be able to do this podcast with you today. As you know, my background, I'm a PhD animal nutritionist. I was trained at Kansas State University. Back in the olden days, when I was trained, there was no such thing as the pet food program as we have today. And so I was trained as a ruminant nutritionist, but that's actually served me very well because when you understand ruminant nutrition, you understand both, the simple stomach and the complex rumen and how nutrients are absorbed. And with all the things that have been happening lately with the gut microbiome, my background in ruminant nutrition has really come into use. After I finished my PhD, I worked for a short time at the USDA Human Nutrition Research Center. And then I was hired by Hills in their research and development department. And that's where you and I worked together for a while. And I was there for 32 years, retired just a few years ago from Hills. And since then, I've been able to pick and choose the things that interest me the most and been helping at Kansas State University as an adjunct professor, both at the Manhattan campus and at the Olathe campus, and working in the pet food industry still as a consultant. So I help some smaller companies and young startup companies and ingredient companies navigate their way into the pet food industry.
Tired of navigating the pet food industry alone? The Pet Food Inner Circle brings together the brightest minds in pet nutrition, where seasoned professionals share real insights and tackle the challenges that matter most. When you need answers, industry leaders are just a conversation away. Ready to join the circle? Visit petfoodinnercircle.com and connect with your peers today.
Well, it sounds like you've had quite an exciting career, some of it which, I've pleased we overlapped with. And it was interesting, we'll also talk later, I hope, about that sort of career management and how that works. But for this talk, I'd really like to think about weight management. And, the first thing is, I look in a mirror and my weight management isn't what I want either. And so maybe this is not just about pets, but we're focusing on pets. Why do you think it's so hard? What makes this a difficult thing for the pet owners? How do you see it?
Yeah, so feeding pets correctly is hard, and pets don't feed themselves. It's us humans that feed them, and we're not doing the greatest job at feeding ourselves in a healthy way either. I looked up some statistics just this morning, and the latest thing is 75% of people in the U.S. are overweight or obese, and that's a lot. So we're not doing great with ourselves. We know now with the latest data that's come in for pets that about 60% of our dogs and cats are overweight or obese. And so, we're not doing great ourselves. And so we're feeding our pets, but there's a lot of stuff that's stacked against the pet as well. One of the ways that makes a pet a great pet is if they're neutered or spayed. And when you remove those reproductive hormones, that changes metabolism, and it really sets those pets up for the potential for weight gain. The other thing is kind of our lifestyle. Even though, there are some people that are really quite active, actually, our pets are very inactive. Most house pets today just don't get a lot of exercise. The interesting thing is if you ask pet parents, is your pet active? They say, yes, of course, because they're remembering the 30 seconds that they had the zoomies around the room, or when the cat was, bouncing from the couch to the chair. And that's what they remember. And they're like, yes, my pet is active. But when you look at a whole 24-hour period, or you look at the week, actually our pets are very inactive. So we have a few things stacked against them. And then there's lots of really tasty things to feed them, which obviously gets them into the issue of too many calories for the amount that they're expending.
Yeah. So, it's the calories. Lots of times, at least with when I had my pets, I was limiting their calories by how much I fed them. And that becomes really hard, doesn't it? You remember when we were writing those feeding guides, and we'd always say, well, here's the population, and trying the population. But the spectrum of that population is fantastic. There's a tremendous difference in what a pet needs to be optimum weight. How do we manage that, do you think?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. The individual variability in terms of the amount of calories a pet needs is really, really tricky. You and I were lucky to work at a facility where we had really good records on what calories it takes to maintain a healthy weight in a pet. But that's really hard to do in your own home. It takes a lot of work to figure out exactly what calories you're feeding from all the different sources, and then how many of those calories your pet needs to maintain the weight. So it's tricky. The other thing is, and I've just recently I was able to write a couple short articles that went into the Pet Food Industry magazine, and I talked about in those articles kind of the difficulties with figuring out metabolizable energy content of pet foods. Those metabolizable energy equations that are out there, especially the one that AFCO, is used, the modified Atwater, isn't great for all types of pet foods, and especially some of the pet foods that are on the market today that are very highly digestible. The Atwater modified Atwater equation underestimates those calories. And so, getting the right calorie content of even the product that the person is trying to feed their pet can be problematic. And even if they're really diligent about figuring that out, they may still be frustrated because they can't figure out why their pet is either gaining weight when they're trying to really limit those calories. And some of it has to do with that variability.
Yeah, I mean, all of those household things come into interaction, don't they? I remember one conversation I was having where, they were feeding less and less of their pet food each day. And finally they figured out, hey, other people are feeding my pet because I'm clearly not giving them enough to survive, yet much less gain weight, and they're still gaining weight. And of course, the kids came into play pretty easily there. And oh yeah, I happen to be sneaking them a little food on the side. They looked hungry, Dad.
That's exactly right. And I tell this story of my daughter's dog that was visiting me for a while. And I was carefully watching, how much I was giving her. And I could almost see her daily getting fatter. And I was like, what in the world is going on? Well, unbeknownst to me, she had run over to the neighbors and every day ate a whole bowl of cat food and then came home and acted like nothing happened.
Pretty happy with life. I mean, that's funny.
Yeah. So yeah, it's hard, And the other thing that's hard for a pet owner is when you go into the pet store or you look online, there are very few products in the whole scheme of products that are available that are designed for pets that have weight issues, which is really surprising to me given that we have 60% of pets. So we have pet food companies today that are making products for the minority of pets. So the vast majority of products that are on the market are for healthy weight pets. They're not for pets that have a weight management issue. So I think there's a big opportunity for pet food makers to say, aha, we have a whole new population of pets and we could, make products for them and I would love to see a pet food company come out with a range of products that's strictly for, let's keep pets at a healthy weight. Usually it's the opposite, one SKU or, one product in their whole range is for those pets.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. If we think about the actual pets eating the food, there's a real unbalance between products available and need. Well, let's talk about those products a minute and think what, you and I both have formulated foods to aid in the management of obesity, but what would you put in them? And let's chat about the different things, you could put into a pet food that would make it more aligned with that need.
Yeah. So, I like to think that a good place to start is with the tried and true. And the tried and true to me is a lower calorie, lower fat product. And there's lots of evidence that those products work. And they work well to help pets, from gaining weight and also if they need to lose weight. So those products can be a really good place to start for a formulator. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of guidance that comes through, say, the AVCO nutrient profiles to appropriately balance those products. So you kind of have to do your own research and understand how you're going to balance those calories with the other nutrients. So, if pets are, eating a certain amount, they're still getting the daily needs for protein, fat, all those vitamins and minerals like that. So that piece is key. But then, how do I select those ingredients? That's, a really rich area where you can have a lot of flexibility in picking ingredients that are appropriate for a lower fat, lower calorie product.
Let's, we talk about that a minute because these are pets that not only are you restricting them so they lose weight, but they're probably already not very energetically inclined. So they don't take a lot of calories just to live. So those nutrients really have to be well balanced to give them enough. Now, you were very instrumental early on in bringing carnitine, one of these nutrients that we like in pets that are, I like it a number of ways, but certainly in pets that have a need to lose a little weight. Let's talk about carnitine a little. What do you think about it? What was maybe a little bit of what your history experiences? I think that's pretty interesting and how it affects pets.
Yeah, so carnitine was a nutrient that in the mid 1990s at Hills we were looking at that as a nutrient that could be beneficial in helping overweight pets. And carnitine's basic role is to facilitate beta oxidation of fat. And I like to describe carnitine as kind of the guy that's throwing the fuel on the fire, right? So if you're trying to burn have a fire burning, you need to like pile the wood on the fire. And carnitine is the guy that's just throwing that wood onto the fire. That beta oxidation is the fire. And so it plays that role of, moving fatty acids to be utilized for energy. So when you have inadequate amounts of carnitine available, then your beta oxidation isn't working at optimal range. So if you're trying to help pets lose weight, that beta oxidation and utilization of fat for energy and reduction of body fat, which is the goal, can't proceed at an optimal rate. And so carnitine is synthesized in the body, and it's synthesized from several amino acids, but you can supply it as a supplement. And so some of the early research that we did were to understand what's the optimal level of L-carnitine that really allows for the utilization of fat as at a maximal rate. And so there was a lot of studies we did with dose titrations of supplementation of L-carnitine. The other thing was we wanted to make sure it was safe to supplement, and all of that went into a application to AFCO and to FDA to approve L-carnitine for use in pet foods, and that was a multi-year process with lots of different studies that we ran. But it's been shown in a lot of different situations, and cats in particular, if they're losing weight, they need to really burn that fat up. Otherwise, it accumulates in the liver and causes hepatic lipidosis. So there's been some things that have shown that, especially obese cats that are on weight management programs, they can really benefit from foods that have additional L-carnitine supplementation.
Well, I would just, I think it's a fascinating compound. It's one of those things that sort of always makes me pleased I'm in nutritional biology, because here's a compound that the pet or that we can make, and yet feeding it changes its circulating concentration and changes its activity level. So you may remember we looked at it recently with betaine, for example, and it had a very positive effect on immune response. So it's this energetic of life that, it just seems to push it, probably like I said, pushes it in a little way to maybe better or more efficiently metabolize fat. But one can imagine during weight loss how that's really beneficial.
Right. The other fascinating thing is, because of carnitine's role in metabolism, it actually affects the utilization of other nutrients too. And it's through the acyl-CoA ratio that carnitine is instrumental in. But in that way, it helps to kind of prevent certain utilization of, say, amino acids for energy. So it kind of helps preserve, muscle mass or the breakdown of muscle for energy utilization too. So it plays a central role in the whole metabolism process. And like betaine being that kind of compound that can affect body composition and, some other sort of partitioning agents that are out there. It's a really interesting area to explore. Some of your work that you published, and then others that have been publishing, say, in the livestock space, hasn't really, is really the beginning of thinking about how these compounds can be used, or these nutrients can be used in pet foods, and especially pet foods for weight management, which hasn't really been explored to a great depth, really.
Well, I think it's fascinating, and it's a little bit of, we get to be the ones looking back at a career. But when I was first learning about nutrients, there were so many, right? You had to use the micronutrients and the minerals and the vitamins and all the macronutrients and how they break down types of starches and amino acids. And I don't think I got to stuff like carnitine or betaine. It's like that was all after graduation. And I just think there's a fascinating, I don't know how to describe it, web of interacting nutrients that really matter for pets, for us.
Right, for sure. And even if you think more simply about things, just choices of ingredients that are supplying nutrients. So if you're trying to formulate a lower calorie, lower fat food, and I'm thinking about protein sources to put in my food. Well,
Yes.
one thing to maybe consider is, the amount of meat protein versus plant protein. Most plant proteins are not very high in fat. So you can actually change the overall fat level of a pet food by just thinking about the ratio of plant proteins to animal proteins. And then if you think about animal proteins, well, there are the really high fat versions of animal proteins, and there's the more lean versions of them. So, you think about organ meats and heart, for example, isn't typically very fatty meat. And so if you're thinking about adding and using animal proteins, it may be just simple choices from, I used to use a lot of, this, fatty chicken product, and now I can move to a more lean version of that.
Yes.
And the same way with fish, it's the same way. There's fattier ones and leaner ones.
And it's interesting because from a consumer's perspective, that doesn't appear in the ingredient panel. It'll say chicken, but you don't know how much that chicken is protein, because you sort of think you've got lean chicken breasts there, but it's all chicken, whether it's lean or fat. And so, I mean, if it's chicken fat, but you know what I mean? It can come across with the same name.
Yeah, it may not appear any different on the label to a pet owner. Your choices, and the other thing is, when you substitute in things that are of vegetable origin or fruits, those can be really appealing to pet owners. But the majority of vegetables and fruits, have very little fat and oftentimes don't add a lot of extra calories. So you can, balance your recipe a little differently and have a dramatic difference in terms of the overall calorie content and fat content of the product.
Sure.
One of the things that kind of bothers me one of the things that bothers me today is I see some of, pet food companies, they're talking about just reduced portion size, or it's all about portion size. And although there are people that are drastically overfeeding portions, just reducing portions is very difficult because you have a pet that may be used to eating a certain amount, and you have, less food, then the begging behaviors kick in more. Very difficult for a pet owner to manage that. And so one of the things to think about is, how can I make a product that helps a pet portion size on their own almost? And so one of the things you can do is add some things that make the pet feel fuller too. And that's an ingredient selection as well.
It's pretty, I think it's interesting and complex, right, to do this well. We just have a few minutes left. I wonder if we might talk, many times you and I have talked about microbiota and the benefits and sort of interest in feeding, that ecosystem that you thought about early in ruminant nutrition. I was sort of, I always sort of thought we can't measure this stuff, and it was not an area of my expertise, but it's important and becoming probably more so. So, what do you think about that? What can we learn? How can we use it in the aid in the management of obesity?
Yeah, so it's a really exploding field, understanding the power of the gut microbiome. Unfortunately, we don't know enough yet to truly pinpoint you need to do this, or this gut microbiome is a healthy one. So there's still a lot to be learned, but fiber and prebiotic fiber we know is good in general. So adding fiber, especially those fibers that have a prebiotic effect, definitely can be beneficial. There's some data out there that a probiotic might have, some benefits in weight management. But again, trying to put all those pieces together, there's still a lot of missing gaps. One of the things, though, that really excites me, and I think this is where, pulling various pieces of information together could be really innovative, is using AI to help formulate pet foods. And there's been some stuff done on the human food side where they have AI to help formulate like a lower fat product or a lower salt product, or products that are purely plant based. And, there's some really interesting stuff that's happening with AI aided formulation. Hopefully, it'll never replace the nutritionist element, obviously, because there still needs to be, human intervention. But I think there's a lot of potential there. And the knowledge that, we would bring to it with, okay, these are, the nutrients we're looking for. This is the nutrient content in these ingredients. This is how we want the product to taste. This is how we want the product to look. And then having AI come up with options could streamline the product development process, make things go a little bit faster, and come up with some really unique solutions. And then if you build into that, things about the gut microbiome, wow, I think there's a lot of potential for new and different products that work really effectively for weight management.
Well, that almost seems like an overarching thought. So let's break with that. But thank you for this time. I think it's just a fascinating area, and I hope we talk about it again, because I think there's just a lot of areas within this weight management where, we haven't had time today. But I think we've had a good chat. So let's call it a day. Thank you, Dr. Gross, for your expertise and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I appreciate it.